ROALD DAHL George's marvelous medicine. Grandma. I'm going to shopping in the village, George's mother says to George on the Saturday morning, so be a good boy and don't get up to mischief. This was a silly thing to say to a small boy at any time. It immediately made him wonder what sort of mischief he might get up to. And don't forget to give Grandma her medicines at 11 o'clock, the mother said. Then out she went, closing the back door behind her. Grandma, who was dozing in her chair by the window, opened one weak little eyes and said, "Now you heard what your mother said, George. Don't forget my medicines." "No, Grandma," George says, and just try to behave yourself for once while she's away. "Yes, Mama. Yes, Grandma," George says. George was bored to tears. He didn't have a brother or sister. His father was a farmer, and the farm they lived on was miles away from anywhere. So there were never any children to play with. He was tired of staring at pigs and hens and cows and sheep. He was especially tired of having to live in the same house as that grizzly old giant of a grandma. Looking for her all by himself was hardly the most exciting way to spend a Saturday morning. "You can make me a nice cup of tea for a start," Grandma says to George. "That'll keep you out of mischief for a few minutes." "Yes, Grandma," George says. George couldn't help disliking Grandma. She was a selfish, grumpy old woman. She had pale brown teeth and a small, puckered-up mouth like a dog's bottom. "How much sugar in your tea today, Grandma?" George asked her. "1 spoon," she says. "No milk." Most grandmothers are lovely, kindly, helpful old ladies, but not this one. She spent all days and every day sitting in her chairs by the window, and she was always complaining, grousing, grunting, and grumbling, gripping about something or other. Never once, even on her best days, she smiled at George and said, "Well, how are you this morning, George?" Or, "Why don't you and I have a game of the snakes and ladders?" Or, "How was school today?" She didn't seem to care about other people's, only about herself. She was marvelous old grouch. George went into the kitchen and made Grandma a cup of tea with a tea bag. He put 1 spoon of sugar in it and no milk. He stirred the sugar well and carried the cup into the living room. Grandma sipped the tea. "It's not sweet enough," she says. "Put more sugar in." George took a cup back to the kitchen and added another spoonful of sugar. He stirred it again and carried carefully into Grandma. Where the saucer," she says. "I won't have a cup without a saucer." George fetched her a saucer. "And what about the teaspoon, if you please?" "I stirred it for you, Grandma. I stirred it well. I stir my own tea, thank you so much," she said. "Fetch me a teaspoon." George fetched her a teaspoon. When George's mother or father were home, Grandma never ordered George about like this. It was only when she had him on her own that she began treating him badly. "You know what's the matter with you?" the old woman says, staring at George on the rim of the teacup with those bright, weak little eyes. "You're growing too fast. Boys who grow too fast become stupid and lazy." "But I can't help myself. I'm growing fast." fast, Grandma, George said. Of course you can, she snapped, growing nasty childish habits. But I have to grow, Grandma. If I didn't grow, we'd never be grown-ups. Rubbish, boy, rubbish, she says. Look at me. Am I growing? Certainly not. But you did once, Grandma. Only very little, the woman answered. I gave up growing when I was extremely small, along with all the other nasty children's habits like laziness and disobedience and Greeks and sloppiness and untidiness and stupidity. You hadn't given up any of these things, have you? I'm still only a little boy, Grandma. You're 8 years old, she snorted. That's old enough to know better. If you don't stop growing soon, it'll be too late. Too late for what, Grandma? It's ridiculous, she went on. You're nearly as tall as me already. George took a good look at Grandma. She certainly was a very tiny person. Her legs were so short she had to give a full footstools to put her feet on, and her hat only came halfway up the back of the armchair. Daddy says it's fine for a man to be tall, George said. Don't listen to your daddy, Grandma says. Listen to me. But how do I stop myself growing? George asked her. Eat less chocolate, Grandma said. Does chocolate make you grow? It makes you grow the wrong way, she snapped. Instead of down. Grandma sipped some tea, but never took her eyes from the little boy who stood before her. Never grow up, she says. Always down. Yes, Grandma. And stop eating chocolates. Eat cabbage instead. Cabbage? Oh no, I don't like cabbage, George says. It's not what you like or what you don't like, Grandma snapped. It's what's good for you that counts. From now on, you must eat cabbage 3 times a day. Mountains of cabbage. And if it's got caterpillars in it, so much the better. Ouch, George says. Caterpillars give you brains. The old man says. Mommy washes them down the sink, George says. Mommy's as stupid as you are, Grandma says. Cabbage doesn't taste of anything without a few boiled caterpillars in it. Slugs too. Not slugs, George cried out. I couldn't eat slugs. Whenever I see a live slugs on a piece of lettuce, Grandma says, I gobble it up quick before it curls away. Delicious. She squeezed her lips together tight so that her mouth became a tiny wrinkle hole. Delicious, she said again. Worms and slugs and billybugs. You don't know what's good for you. You're joking, Grandma. I never joke, she says. Beetles are perhaps best of all. They go crunch. Grandma, that's beastly. The old hag grinned, showing those pale brown teeth. Sometimes, if you're lucky, she said, you get the beetle instead of stems of a stick of celery. That's what I like. Grandma, how could you? You found all sorts of nice things in the stick of raw celery, the old woman went on. Sometimes it's earwigs. I don't want to hear about it, cried George. A big fat earwig is very tasty, Grandma says, licking her lips. But you got to be very quick, my dear. When you put one of those in your mouth, it has a pair of sharp nippers on its back, and if it grabs your tongue with those, it never lets go. So you've got to bite the earwigs first. Chop, chop, before it bites you. George started edging toward the door. He wanted to get as far away as possible from this filthy old woman. You're trying to get away from me, aren't you? She says, pointing the finger straight at George's face. You're trying to get away from Grandma. Little George stood by the door, staring at the old hag in her chair. She stared back at him. How could it be, George wondered, that she was witch? He had always thought witches are only in fairy tales, but now he was not so sure. Come closer to me, little boy, she said, beckoning to him with a horny finger. Come closer to me, and I will teach you secrets. George didn't move. Grandma didn't move either. I know a great many secrets, she said, and suddenly she smiled. It was thin, icy smile, the kind of snakes might make you before it bites you. Come over here to Grandma, and she'll whisper secret to you. George took a step backward, edging closer to the door. You mustn't be frightened of your old Grandma, she said, smiling that icy smile. George took another step backwards. Some of us, she says, and all at once she was leaning forward in her chair and whispering in the throaty sort of voice George had never heard her use before. Some of us, she says, have magic powers that can twist the creatures of this earth into the wildest shapes. A tingle of electricity flashed down the length of George's spines. He began to feel frightened. Some of us, the old woman went on, have fire on our tongues and sparks in our bellies and wizardry in the tip of our fingers. Some of us know secrets that would make your hair stand straight up on end and your eyes pop out of their sockets. George wanted to run away, but his feet seemed stuck to the floor. We know how to make your nails drop off and teeth grow out of your fingers instead. George began to tremble. It was her face that frightened him of most. A frosty smile, the brilliant, unblinking eye. We know how to have you wake up in the morning with a long tail coming out from behind you. Grandma, he cried out, stop! We know secrets, my dear, about dark places where dark things live and squirms and slither all over each other. George made a dive for a door. It doesn't matter how far you run, he heard her saying. You won't ever get away. George ran into the kitchen, slamming the door behind him.